Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. It is time for me to give my official national title pick, the final game of the 2024 college football season, Ohio State and Notre Dame. This game will be taking place, of course, on a Monday, as it always seems to. There is some talk about potentially changing the college football schedule a little bit. I agree. I think it should be earlier. I think the national title should be this Monday to where everything's a week earlier, but that's another story for another day. You do have Ohio State right now sitting 9.5 point favorites. They've had a very impressive run. They just beat Texas. They blew out Oregon and Tennessee after the terrible Michigan loss as 20-point favorites. They are the number 8 overall seed taking on Notre Dame. Notre Dame right now, it's kind of funny, these teams. Ohio State already 13-2, Notre Dame 14-1 on the year. So these teams playing a lot, and both of these teams, obviously Notre Dame not being in a conference, they didn't have that extra game as a conference championship, and Ohio State did not have one either. But you do have Notre Dame and Ohio State. I guess I'll go Notre Dame first, and then I'll talk about Ohio State, and then I'll give my prediction. I will say the 9.5 point spread pretty high compared to the analytics, very similar to the Ohio State Texas game when the analytics said Ohio State should be like 1 point favorites and they were really 6.5 point favorites. They ended up covering that spread. This game, the analytics say Ohio State should be about 2 point favorites. Notre Dame, if you look, is better in terms of defensive efficiency than Ohio State. Notre Dame's number one, Ohio State's two, but Ohio State has the significantly better offense. When I look at this Notre Dame team, I'm very concerned about how they match up with Ohio State's defense, especially considering the lack of elite skill position players. They do have Jeremiah Love, a really good running back. I know he's been banged up. He averaged around 7 yards a carry, didn't get a ton of carries in their last game against Penn State. That was a game they came back. They were originally down 10-0 in that. They come back. Riley Leonard throwing the ball. It's concerning. I don't have a ton of confidence in him. Notre Dame does have a very sound, solid defense. Unfortunately for them, they are very banged up. I know their fan base has been talking about that a lot over the past few days. They're missing a few of their offensive linemen, quality offensive linemen, which could be an even bigger issue against Ohio State, considering the inability to generate explosive plays against a defense that is very stingy as it is, especially in the red zone. And that's one of the things. If you're not able to generate explosive plays, you're going to get inside of the red zone, inside of the 15, inside of the 10 against this Ohio State defense. When the field gets condensed, OSU is normally really good at forcing field goals or stopping teams on fourth down. We saw that against Texas. We've seen it multiple times this year. They're one of the best teams when there's a goal to go situation in terms of not allowing points or forcing the opposing team to kick a field goal. So for Notre Dame, you're going to want to muck the game up. Very similar game plan to Texas, but even to a bigger degree, Michigan, to where you want to out physical Ohio State. You want to condense the game. You want to limit the possessions. I feel like Oregon and Tennessee both played into Ohio State's hand by going fast, going up tempo on offense. When Ohio State struggles, they don't have the ball a lot. And when they do, they're normally very timid. And it seems like in that Texas game, Ohio State, mid-second quarter, of course, they had the very nice play to Trevion Henderson. But without that, I mean, they did not generate much second quarter, third quarter on offense. Texas was controlling the game. They were controlling the ball. Ohio State was timid. They were throwing screens. They were running the ball on first down. It was very vanilla. And so if you're Notre Dame, you want Ohio State to get boxed into that. There's going to be definitely help coverage when it comes to Jeremiah Smith. He only had one catch. Although, to be honest, there were a few plays and people were saying Jeremiah Smith was open and Will Howard just didn't throw it to him a few plays against Texas. But there is going to be blanket coverage against him. You have to do that if you are Notre Dame. For Ohio State, they do have two other really good receivers, Abuka and Carnell Tate. But for Notre Dame, I am concerned when looking at their offense going up against Ohio State's defense. On the other side, Ohio State, I mean, they've just been very impressive. Now, the first two games were A-plus performances. This last one against Texas, it was a fight. And when you win a national title, you're going to have games where not everything goes right. You know, there's some adversity. Ohio State, I mean, to be fair to Texas, it was 21-14. Texas had first and goal at the 1 yard line. And you're talking about with 4 minutes left, that game being tied at 21. Obviously, Jack Sawyer has the scoop and score, which really puts the game out of reach and makes it a little bit worse. But to be fair to Ohio State, I mean, they definitely did in terms of the overall numbers and efficiencies, they were significantly better than Texas. They had more yards and significantly less plays than the Longhorns did. But you do have to say Texas was able to limit them. And if you are Notre Dame, you're going to have to pressure Will Howard a ton. That's when he really struggles. And sometimes it seems like it's hard for him to see the field really when he gets pressured. A few times that happened against Texas. Certainly that happened a lot against Michigan. But you want to limit the game, control the ball if you're Notre Dame. If you are Ohio State, I might mix in some up tempo. The problem with up tempo in a game like this is Notre Dame's going to be going very slow. We know that. So you risk putting your defense on the field for extended periods of time if your offense is only out there, even in an extended drive, if you go up tempo for like 2 or 3 minutes. But Ohio State to me is just way more talented than Notre Dame. This game to me is very similar to last year. If you look at the Michigan versus Washington matchup, Washington made it. They were a fun team. I mean, Washington certainly had a better offense than Notre Dame does, but Notre Dame this year has a better defense than Washington did. But it just felt like Michigan was just better in basically all phases. To me, it just feels like Ohio State's better. I mean, Ohio State is so loaded everywhere. Their entire defense, I mean, all of those guys are going to be draft picks, multiple third rounders. I mean, Jack Sawyer, JTT, Tuamaloau has like, what at this point, like, I think he almost has 10 sacks this year and like 17 tackles for loss now. He's been playing really well, finally living up to his 5-star potential. You've got just a very athletic defense. The linebacker, Sonny Styles, playing very well right now. And so, to me, Ohio State is just more talented than Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wants to win this game, it's going to be very, very close. You're going to have to rely on the same things Michigan did. Missed field goals, Ohio State, bad play calling. You could say in a few of those drives, late first quarter, early second quarter against Texas, Ohio State, they kind of hurt themselves with the penalties and 15 yards back and really going off schedule. We'll see if they do that against Notre Dame. But to me, this national title feels like a very similar situation to a Michigan versus Washington national title. So where if Ohio State does what they're supposed to do and plays a B-plus game, they're going to win this game 100 times out of 100, or like 97 times out of 100. It just feels like Ohio State coming in. They're more healthy. Yes, they do have the offensive line problem, and that could be an issue because Notre Dame is better in pass defense than run defense. You'd think you'd be able to take advantage of that if you're Ohio State. But against Texas, we know Ohio State, right now, their patchwork offensive line, they do a good job pass blocking. They'll give Will Howard time. He's only been sacked like 2 times in the last 4 games. The problem is the run blocking. They get no push. And so that could be an issue, especially when you're talking about 3rd and short, 4th and short. If you're Notre Dame, you want to force as many, even if it's 3rd and inches, force as many. And if you're Ohio State, why not just QB sneak it? I don't know why teams don't do that more often, especially a team like Ohio State. But looking at this game, Ohio State sitting right now 9.5-point favorites. They've covered in their past 3 games, all 3 playoff games. Notre Dame, on the other hand, they were slight favorites against Georgia. You had the situation with Carson Beck not playing, kind of a weird thing to where some Georgia fans were thinking maybe the backup would be better. Didn't end up happening. They win that game, and then they beat a Penn State team who Ohio State also beat on the road by 10. Notre Dame wins that game by 3. You could argue about some calls here and there, but they got it done. In a game like this, I just think Ohio State's better, and I think Ohio State wins this game around 31-10. I think the story is going to be Ohio State's defense shutting down Notre Dame's offense. Notre Dame is very one-dimensional. Yes, Riley Leonard can run the ball. They're definitely going to need to use him to use his legs, but I don't think they can vertically challenge Ohio State. And if you're not generating any explosive plays against Ohio State, their defense is too good. You have to get chunk yardage plays if you want to sustain drives and score. You're not going to be able to have 4 13-play drives that all go for touchdowns. It's just not going to happen against this Ohio State defense. And I don't think Notre Dame has the skill position players on the outside to contend with Ohio State. Ohio State's just way more talented pretty much everywhere, and I think they win this game relatively easily. I've picked Ohio State to cover every spread in this playoff, and I think they're going to cover another one. When Ohio State, what were they, around 6-point favorites against Texas? There was a lot of the public was on Ohio State, but you saw a lot of late people, like when there was a day left before the game and going into the game, a lot of people were saying, well, there's so much value on Texas. This is crazy. They're saying the exact same thing about Notre Dame. And honestly, I'm surprised. I thought people would understand that, yes, Ohio State's going to be a big favorite in this game. They're way better than Notre Dame. They just are. Notre Dame is a very well-coached team. They've got a good defense, but they are injured on the offensive side of the ball. And I just do not think they match up well with Ohio State at all. I would be surprised if they got over 300 total yards of offense in this game. I do think they're going to try and muck it up. They're going to use a very similar Michigan game plan. You're going to have Ohio State make mistakes. You're going to have Will Howard, and he is prone to doing it, throwing an interception, maybe two interceptions, not seeing a defender. That happened a few times against Texas. One of them cost him an interception and the pass attempt to Jeremiah Smith with the linebacker dropping back. But I would say in this situation, I think Will Howard is certainly playing good enough. Judkins running the ball really well, especially inside the 10s, which is very critical for Ohio State to finish off drives and score touchdowns. They did not kick a single field goal against Texas. And in this game, I think they end up with 4 touchdowns and a field goal, maybe a defensive score, or maybe a short field, something like that. And I would be surprised if Notre Dame won this game. Notre Dame could muck it up and they might be able to keep it close because we have seen a variation of this Ohio State team really struggle. I mean, against Nebraska, they barely beat them. They struggled with Northwestern for a while. The crazy loss to Michigan, although you could say that's because there's some other things going on with Ryan Day trying to get over a mental hurdle. But right now, it seems like Ohio State's playing so loose. They know they're better than Michigan. They've got way more athletes. They're going to win this game, I think, relatively easily. I've got it 31-10. The Buckeyes win. They cover the 9.5-point spread. And Ryan Day gets his first national title. And what a close this would be for Ohio State right now. Ohio State, in terms of, these are the number 1 and number 2 teams in terms of the analytics, the FPI. Buckeyes sitting, according to the analytics, 2-point favorites, but it's not surprising. Some injuries to Notre Dame along with Ohio State just on an extreme hot streak. We knew Ohio State going into the season. They were the most talented team in college football, and they did get a little lucky this year for sure with the expanded playoff. If this was a 14 playoff, you lose to Michigan like that, you're done. But Ohio State gets the extra chance. Personally, I do like it. I think it rewards the better team. And, you could argue, well, why'd they lose to Michigan? But this is what it sometimes happens in sports, to where the better team loses. It is what it is. Ohio State still had a very good regular season. They beat a very solid Penn State team. They beat a good Indiana team. They lost by 1 point to Oregon. They end up avenging that. And I think they end up beating Notre Dame here in the national title. Notre Dame, pretty crazy season themselves, considering people were saying to fire Marcus Freeman. People also said to fire Ryan Day. But, I mean, you lose to a MAC school, and that MAC school ended up not even being very good. Northern Illinois in week 3. Or was it week 2? I don't remember. But Notre Dame, they had, I would say, a lot less challenges than Ohio State. To be fair to Notre Dame, they've always got this independent schedule, but they have this agreement with the ACC, so they face like 4 or 5 ACC teams every year. And, they faced Florida State. Florida State ended up being terrible. They faced USC. USC ended up being not very good in the rivalry game at the end of the season. They had some games on their schedule that were supposed to be tough matchups, and that's kind of why they got a decently easy schedule. But listen, they certainly proved themselves. You beat a Georgia team. I think, it's a solid win. Georgia's got a ton of athletes. I would say Georgia was kind of broken, and they had a weird year where they beat Texas. They ended up winning the SEC, but the SEC overall was kind of down. So, I mean, that win, while it's impressive, it's not the same Georgia team we've seen the past 3 or 4 years. There's no doubt about it. And the win against Indiana, that was a really solid win. There's no doubt about it. They basically won that game 27-3. Indiana scored 2 really late touchdowns. And then the win against Penn State. I mean, that win really didn't impress me a ton, honestly. That was a game they were losing early. They end up coming back. It's close. But either way, I will take Ohio State to win the national title 31-10. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.